The internal surface of the cranial base is divided into three cranial fossa: anterior, medial, and posterior. The anterior cranial fossa is separated from the middle cranial fossa by the lesser wing of the sphenoid, and the medial cranial fossa is separated from the posterior cranial fossa by the petrous part of the temporal bone. Anterior cranial fossa lodges the frontal lobes of the cerebral hemispheres. It is bounded anteriorly by the inner surface of the frontal bone, and in the midline there is a frontal crest. Its posterior boundary is the sharp lesser wing of the sphenoid, which articulates laterally with the frontal bone and meets the anterior-inferior angle of the parietal bone, or the pterion. The middle end of the lesser wing of the sphenoid forms the anterior clinoid processes on each side, which give attachment to the tentorium cerebelli. The median part of the anterior cranial fossa is limited posteriorly by the groove for the optic chiasm. The floor of the fossa is formed by the ridged orbital plates of the frontal bone laterally and by the cribriform plate of the ethmoid medially. The Crista Galli is a sharp upward projection of the ethmoid bone in the midline for the attachment of the falx cerebri. Here it is. The upper surface of the cribriform plate supports the olfactory bulbs, and the small perforations in the cribriform plate are for the olfactory nerves. The middle cranial fossa has a small median part represented by body of sphenoid bone called sella turcica, and expanded lateral parts formed by the squamous and petrous parts of the temporal bones and by the greater wings of the sphenoid. To make understanding of this region easier, let's review the structures of the sphenoid bone first. The sphenoid bone resembles a bat having a centrally placed body with greater and lesser wings that are outstretched on each side. The body of the sphenoid contains the sphenoid air sinuses. Passing through the bases of the lesser wings of sphenoid are the optic canals. The prechiasmatic sulcus is visible between them. Here it is. The greater wings are also perforated by three foramina: foramen rotundum, foramen ovale, and foramen spinosum. The slit-like opening between the lesser and greater wings of the sphenoid is the superior orbital fissure. The body of sphenoid occupies the central part of the middle cranial fossa and is often described as the sella turcica, consisting of three parts: the tuberculum cellae, hypophyseal fossa, and dorsum cellae. The tuberculum cellae is a prominent median elevation forming the posterior boundary of the prechiasmatic sulcus. Here it is. The hypophyseal fossa, or pituitary fossa, is a median depression of the body of the sphenoid bone that accommodates the pituitary gland. The dorsum cellae, or back of the saddle, is a square plate of bone projecting superiorly from the body of the sphenoid. It forms the posterior boundary of the sella turcica, and its prominent superlateral angles make up the posterior clinoid processes. On both sides of the body of sphenoid, the carotid groove must be identified. Internal carotid artery passes here through the venous lacunas of the cavernous sinus. The internal opening of the carotid canal is situated on the side of the foramen lacerum, the large and irregular opening between the apex of the petrous part of the temporal bone, which is here, and the sphenoid bone, medially. Lateral to the foramen lacerum is an impression on the apex of the petrous part of the temporal bone for the trigeminal ganglion. On the anterior surface of the petrous bone are two grooves for nerves. The largest medial groove is for the greater petrosal nerve, a branch of the facial nerve, and the smaller one is for the lesser petrosal nerve, a branch of the tympanic plexus. The arcuate eminence, caused by the underlying superior semicircular canal, and the tegmen tympani, that is the upper wall of the tympanic cavity, could be also recognized here. Now let's review all the structures you have seen. Body of sphenoid, lesser wing, sphenoidal crest, anterior clinoid process, optic canal, prechiasmatic sulcus, greater wing, superior orbital fissure, foramen rotundum, foramen ovale, foramen spinosum, tuberculum celer, hypophyseal fossa, dorsum celer, posterior clinoid processes, carotid groove, carotid canal, foramen lacerum, impression for the trigeminal ganglion, groove for the greater petrosal nerve, groove for the lesser petrosal nerve, arcuate eminence, and tegment tympani. The posterior cranial fossa is the largest and deepest one. It contains the cerebellum, pons, and medulla oblongata. This fossa is formed mostly by the occipital and temporal bones. From the dorsum celer there is a marked incline, the clevus, which leads to the foramen magnum. Posterior to this large foramen, the internal occipital crest is a landmark that divides the posterior part of the fossa into two cerebellar fossa. The crest ends superiorly in the internal occipital protuberance. Broad grooves in this fossa are formed by the transverse and sigmoid sinuses. At the base of the petrous ridges of the temporal bone are the jugular foramina. Anterosuperior to the jugular foramen is the internal acoustic meatus. The hypoglossal canals lie superior to the anterior lateral margin of the foramen magnum, passing through the bases of the occipital condyles. Now let's review the terms. So the posterior cranial fossa, clevus, internal occipital crest, cerebellar fossa, internal occipital protuberance, the groove of transverse sinus and groove of sigmoid sinus, jugular foramina, internal acoustic meatus, hypoglossal canal, and foramen magnum.